Okay, we are back to talk about Disclaimer, Episode 7, premiering today, November 8th on Apple TV Plus. This series, written and directed by Alfonso Cuarón, taken from 2015 Renee Knight novel of the same name. With Episode 7, the finale, we pick up right where we left off at the end of Episode 6. Catherine in Stephen's house tells him a different version of events where Jonathan forced himself into her room, threatened her and Nicholas with a knife, and then raped her for hours on end before leaving them behind. The next day, there is some consistency. Jonathan was on the beach with Catherine and Nicholas. He ended up saving Nicholas before drowning in the attempt to do that. Catherine admits that she did nothing to help rescue Jonathan. After finishing her story, Catherine then coincidentally realizes Stephen put something in her tea and she passes out. Once that happens, Stephen, who's got a syringe of chemical products in his pocket, still leaves to go to the hospital to kill Nicholas, but stops right before he does it when Nicholas wakes up and calls out for his mother. Stephen eventually believes Catherine's story and tells Robert the whole series of events before he leaves. Catherine wakes up very quickly and rushes to the hospital where she learns that Robert knows everything, but also learns Nicholas is okay. Stephen, apparently coming to grips with what has happened, burns everything he has relating to Nancy, to Jonathan, to Catherine. Catherine is somewhat furious and divorces Robert, we learn. After Robert seems relieved Catherine was raped instead of involved in an affair. And eventually, at the end, we see Catherine and Nicholas are able to come to some sort of reconciliation. I think the biggest topic of this episode is we see the full version of Catherine's truth, and we are based on that story and based on consequences and decisions from her sequence of events. We're led to believe that this is the truth, and I guess
Yeah.
that's what we're left with here.
Yeah, that's what I thought was interesting. And I don't want to I don't know, yeah, I want to be careful in what I'm about to say, I guess, because it did really feel like, okay, on the one hand, we're getting Catherine's perspective. That's good. That's what I wanted. But then we are really led to believe that is the truth in her perspective.
Yep.
And it's not that I want to question that necessarily, I mean, if it had felt more ambiguous, even I could imagine myself coming in and saying, believe women, but it
Yeah.
doesn't even really feel ambiguous. And I'm not so in terms of how well the show works. Um, I mean, I guess that's fine. I don't know if this is a criticism or not. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, this was, I mean, I guess, got what I expected, which was a full version of her account, which, again, certainly is plausible, believable. She was there. She, ha has a justification and an explanation for everything that's happened, and, really is trying to get out of Stephen. Does he not know that his son was this way? And so I think it was more that, we touched on this last week, but maybe it was just a little bit too predictable in a way. It was a little bit too on the nose for what we were told and shown and tried to move towards with the narrative over the first 6 episodes that okay, yeah, it actually was just the opposite of what happened. And that's sort of the version that we have here. It just it felt very rushed at the end to me to say, okay, this is the version of truth. And now because of that, all of these things are going to happen very quickly in sequence at the end of the show. Just now that we know this is what actually happened. Just I don't know, just felt a little disjointed to me here at the end.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that would be the source of the criticism that I have, such as it is, because I did find the episode entertaining.
Hmm.
And the series as a whole, then I think was pretty good, I would say. I'm not going to ultimately put it on my list of best TV series ever or tell all my friends or write home about it, but I enjoyed
Yeah,
watching it.
yeah,
But maybe it was related to what we're talking about. Maybe what's bothering me just a little bit is the movement of Stephen coming to believe her story. Maybe that's the
yeah,
thing that feels just a little bit, I don't know, wonky or
yeah.
something.
So that's one of my major questions in this is he hears Catherine's story after she passes out. That does not deter him from I'm calling a taxi right now. I'm going to the hospital. I'm going to take care of the job I started last night. it's just Nicholas waking up that causes him to the last moment to rethink it. Because I thought I was revisiting it today and I thought, oh, there was the photograph he sees at the end when he's burning things. Obviously, Nicholas is in one of those photographs, but he doesn't realize that until after he's made that
Killed.
decision to not kill Nicholas. So it's like, well, it would have been, okay, oh, Nicholas observed this. He's been traumatized by it. But no, that's not even there when he makes the decision to say, no, I'm not going to kill him.
Right. So it didn't feel wildly implausible to me, but I guess I had to read it as not necessarily caused directly by Nicholas, waking up and asking for his mother or whatever, but just that there's some time there where it kind of sets in and he's had to sit with Catherine's account and he realizes that there were a lot of signs that his son was the kind of guy who may well have done what she said, including whatever he did to his girlfriend Sasha that caused her to leave Italy and come back to
Yep.
London.
Yep.
And I think that's how that fits in, right? And so Stephen is realizing that he has been ignoring what was kind of in front of his eyes, which is that his son really like was the kind of guy
Is the
who would rape
monster.
her.
Yeah. Yeah. We got clues from this past two episodes, the different reasons of why Sasha left, the phone calls between Nancy and apparently the mother of Sasha, and just that sort of disdain between them and apparently what she's hearing on the other end. So we're getting clues as to this is who he is. Is it plausible that it would take Stephen this long to understand that that was the truth about who he was? Yeah, I guess so. Especially specifically if you have these thoughts about who your child is. You have Nancy who wrote a book about a sequence of events. You just sort of adapted that as truth at that point, and you don't want to admit to yourself that something else could have happened. So I do see that as just as a I don't know. It just seemed very motivated after Catherine passed out to get to that hospital, do this again, and just I don't know, seeing a son sort of brought him back to reality and said, I shouldn't be doing this. I could see it either way, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose. Right. I mean, it's just I just found myself thinking is well, like would it have been a better story if Stephen wasn't convinced and we had the incredibly tragic ending that was possible here, where he does go to the
Yeah.
hospital and does kill Nicholas and gets caught and he gets arrested, and we're left in the space of the world not being sure what to believe here because you have these
Yeah.
two different accounts. Um,
I think they just spent so many episodes building up the fact that Steven is just borderline sociopathic and is bent on revenge and just I guess perhaps because he knows the truth, he just, that switch flips and I don't know, just would like a little bit more to nudge in that direction, maybe.
yeah, I mean, I think it works okay. And I'm not necessarily lobbying for that alternate version I was
Yeah,
just talking
yeah.
about, but I was at least thinking about it as I watched this. So, I mean, I don't want to like problematically call into question her account.
Hmm.
But you do have the photographs. There is some space for ambiguity beyond what they gave us, right? Because I think that think back to the earlier scene when Robert gets the photographs and the narration about how he's reacting to them, and um, so presuming, well, okay, like, well, okay, we're believing Catherine's account, so everything in the photographs is an act. It's hitting on how photographic reality is not reality, even if it presents itself as such. And I'm like tempted to start talking about Roland Barthes or something like this in the photograph as but like, all right, but it's she didn't okay. When Robert got mad at her, he did not give her space to tell her side of things.
He completely shut her down. Yeah.
But it also didn't seem like she was moving forward really pushing to tell him her side of things.
Yeah, and she may even admit that at the end that, she just did not, she wanted to have that part of her life gone, not introduce it into their family, and no desire or interest in telling them about it. And so I don't know. I mean, if you're confronted with that, it almost feels like your hand is forced at that point. You have to say something.
Yeah, and she doesn't
Yeah.
still. And maybe this makes sense. She was meaningfully trying to protect Nicholas from the truth of all of this. Um, I guess there's another question there of whether this works or whether we buy this. He doesn't remember, right? You mentioned that Steven sees him in a photograph at the very end when he's burning things. That's another thing. I was like, well, no one noticed this before.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
that particular photograph would seem to indicate that Nicholas saw Jonathan raping Catherine.
hmm
So, okay, we can start thinking about structures of repression and things like this, I suppose.
That's exactly where my mind went. Is this resentment that we've seen Nicholas carry throughout this season? Is it deep seated in a moment like that? And to your point, has it been repressed? Is it something that he's been carrying with him? Is there some trauma that he's, unwilling to face? Or is that what has led to this resentment of his mother? And they've apparently over a course of some amount of time are able to confront that and reconcile in some way.
Yeah, or yeah, I mean, I think that it's from what we don't see a whole lot, but it does seem to be indicating some level of reconciliation, or I might be tempted to say, okay, well, now they're sort of living in the truth, and part of the problem
Yeah.
is they just had not been.
Yeah.
Um, and Yeah, speaking of Nicholas, I guess though, like the one thing we speculated about that this did not address was how he got out there in the middle of the sea.
That's
And we get no new information on that, right? We're basically being told, okay, he did. It just has like kind of a stupid little kid go down there with his dinghy and
yeah.
get sucked out into the sea. And Catherine was asleep on the beach because she was exhausted because she didn't get any sleep because she'd been raped all night or whatever, maybe that works, but I still just part of me is like, could a little kid really get out through the
Yeah.
waves and
It did make me
um
wonder, but then of course we have this version where Jonathan still goes out to save him. Did Jonathan see Nicholas observe what was happening? That he will try to do something to him? I guess I'm having a hard time with considering what happened and then considering they're on the beach there together literally hours after what happened that night before. What is Jonathan's incentive or motivation to go to do this heroic thing? I just he doesn't seem to be that type of person. If you're thinking about what he just did, the monstrous things he did the night before, it just
yeah.
that part just didn't align. I guess to me,
I mean, I guess you could just say it's a separate sort of thing
yeah,
where perhaps he is a monster in terms of what he did to Catherine, but not the kind of monster who's going to see a drowning child and let the child drown.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I guess. I mean, that's what we're asked to buy. What did you think of how he cuts his arm? I mean, clearly it fits in terms of an explanation of that wound, which you talked about before,
yeah.
but I don't know.
S-
It makes
Square
sense that
peg,
he does it.
square peg, round hole. That was my thoughts. Just you're like forcing something in to try to just try to make sense of something that you saw. Or I don't even see why that was necessary. I'm cutting my arm, lick my blood. I didn't get any of that.
I mean, in terms of how everything fits together, it feels necessary because um, Catherine just up and left after Jonathan died.
Yeah,
So where we previously got the stuff about the wound was in the flashbacks of Stephen and Nancy going to Italy. And I don't know if that would have even been in the book, the
yeah,
Perfect Stranger book. So
I,
there is
yeah.
a way in which the fact that Catherine is providing an explanation for that wound, how else would she have known about it? It isn't clear, right? And then maybe that factors into what makes Stephen realize, oh, she's telling the truth.
Yeah,
Um,
to have that level of intimate detail and knowledge of that, okay, that's a great point. You can, I guess, sort of align the narrative that Stephen and Nancy saw this wound they were the only ones that did, apart from the police. Catherine is referencing him cutting his arm, and so obviously would not have known that they saw the body and asked about that specifically. So yeah, there's some things that sort of lend it to, okay, you can reference something that really very few people knew, so you must be giving us as close a version of the truth as we can expect.
Yeah, I think it works and it functions in that way. But at the same time, I still just keep thinking it's kind of a weird thing to do. And I don't get it, but okay, I don't understand people's kinks in various ways, I
Yeah,
suppose, and but also, well, like, wouldn't he have just like kept bleeding? Wouldn't have there been more blood involved in the whole situation? It doesn't,
exactly.
it's something sticks
Exactly.
in my craw a little bit about how that fits into the story, but this is the end. We're not going to get any more information. It's just, it
Well,
does feel like we're ultimately asked to believe Catherine's version as the truth, and
yeah.
yeah.
And I made a note here is I had seen several things about this over the last week and paid attention to it, and I guess just had glossed over it as we were watching these before that leading up to episode 7, we had not seen any depictions that I can recall of real violence, sexual violence, some things that require a disclaimer at the beginning of the show. And yet they put it at the beginning of every single episode, all 7, 1 to 7. Yeah, we don't see it until 7. So by the time we get here to the finale, it's almost it's almost predicted for us or foretold us that this is what's going to take place. So it's like we should have probably seen exactly this thing coming.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it didn't really function. I just kind of ignored it, I
Yeah,
guess. But
exactly.
maybe for others it was. I didn't full. I mean, I noticed it, right? And but it was more like I was wondering, well, like, okay, what is that referring to?
Right.
More than it occurred to me that be like, oh, it's referring to what will happen in the finale. So
Yeah.
didn't really spoil it for me. Although, from another point of view, it is kind of funny that the show is called Disclaimer, which refers to the disclaimer in The Perfect Stranger, but also there's
Right.
a disclaimer on the show Disclaimer, which informs you basically of how Disclaimer is
You
going
should
to
have
end.
been, yeah, you should have been paying attention to that all along.
So maybe they like that as a little like kind of meta move
Yeah.
or wink at us or
Yeah. I
um
I thought that's probably the case. Yeah.
yeah, there's something else I was gonna say here. What was it? Um I don't know. I mean, I did have a note about Roberts, and I feel like we sort of hit on that. Um, that worked for me. That made sense to me. That ultimately, he learns what really happened, and now he is willing to reconcile with her,
Yeah.
but she's like,
Oh,
no,
thank God. It was just that. You didn't have an affair. Okay, we can,
you're
we can
just
move on
violently
now.
raped.
Yeah, he's ready to move on and she's ready to now confront it. And yeah, that's going to be a tough thing to try to reconcile.
But it did make sense to me that she would be, disturbed by that. That he's like
Yeah.
happy that it was she was sexually assaulted as opposed to had an affair. Um, and so the fact that that led them to a divorce, well, that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Definitely does.
and I don't know anything else to talk about here. I'm left with this feeling like I
Yeah.
was going to say something 90 seconds ago that I've forgotten, but we're wrapping up. So
Yeah.
maybe that's just how it's going to be. And I'll think of it in, an hour.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to your point, that I did find this entire show and this episode entertaining. I thought that, again, having not read this novel, don't know if it's accurate in terms of source material or anything like that. Um, I thought, as we talked about from the very beginning, the three leads of the show are just sublime in terms of what they do. I don't just felt like there was a a smoother path to land the plane. And I'm having trouble articulating what it could have been. But I don't know. It's just too much time. Maybe we need to just give Caron, a 3 hour movie instead of 7 hours of a television show. I don't know. I'm having trouble articulating it.
Yeah, we did talk about that question before, and I'm not sure. I think you could have told the story in 3 hours, two and a
Hmm.
half hours. I don't know. But is it better as a sort of 7 episode TV series? I think maybe it is. I mean, in terms of giving us a little bit more space to get to know the characters. It dragged maybe a little bit at certain points where maybe it could have been tightened up a little. I don't have a big criticism on that front. I'm not going to come on here and say it should have just been a movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I
I mean,
do
to
think,
my knowledge, this is his first foray into television. So, I mean, it's in terms of the visual and production value of this, we talked about this plenty before, but I mean, it's quite well done. So, I mean, it's obviously a major shift between these two mediums.
yeah, I mean, I thought it was very well done, very well directed, and all of
Yeah.
that. So, and I like TV. So, yeah, I'm not going to say it should have been a movie or anything like that. I guess where I land in terms of kind of putting a bow on my position on the series and the ending is personally, perhaps I would have enjoyed it more with a bit more ambiguity.
Mm,
And I
yep.
find it a little surprising that we didn't get that we're still getting, we're getting her perspective, but then are also basically told, and that is true, you know,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Stephen believes it, which is Robert to believe it, and everyone believes that it's true. But there's nothing to really. You could call it into question if you wanted to, but it
Yeah.
almost feels like if you did, you'd be misogynist or something, right? Like it really lands as like this is what happened and it's true. So
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah. I think my one other, this is a minor nitpick, and I would have had a bigger problem with it if a different path had occurred here. But I don't know. It seems like Catherine wakes up like 6 minutes after Stephen leaves, and
Yeah,
he's put these two or three sleeping pills in her tea. And so she's like, minutes behind him getting to the hospital. I was anticipating her getting there and by her presence stopping him from killing Nicholas. I was like, man, this is a real stretch that you're going to make me believe that he drugged her. And despite what we heard about how powerful these sleeping pills are, she's awake a few minutes later and, just on her way to go confront him. In the end, that didn't end up mattering, but I was prepared for it to matter, I guess.
yeah, and she choked some coffee. But see, I don't
Yeah.
think that's the thing. I think if we're going to read this as plausible, it's the adrenaline of
Yeah.
it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's um the anxiety, the terror, the panic that Stephen is on the way to the hospital to kill her son.
Yeah.
Um, and I can buy that on that front. I do, however, think that throughout that whole series of events, she should have been really, really loopy.
I agree. Yes.
So I don't know I don't know that it played that way. She
Yeah.
seemed
A
that's my
half a half a half a
critique
pot of
here.
pot of iced coffee is not going to take away the effects of what should be, making her pass out right now.
Right. She seems maybe a little bit too normal.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I don't know about the getting out of the cab and running thing and whether, like I think she'd fall down or something. She should have been
right.
like more like she was drunk, I guess,
Exactly,
basically. And
exactly.
they didn't really do that. So, perhaps that's fine. It's not a major criticism. It's a TV show, it's fiction, but you're right. It is kind of like, oh no, I took sleeping pills, pass out, wakes up,
Weeks of you.
chug some coffee, and then basically she's good. That's all I'm saying. She should be.
Yeah, yeah, that I
If the
agree.
adrenaline's keeping her going, she should at least be like, what's
Yeah, yeah.
going on?
Well, if we're getting to
Um,
that level of detail, it must mean that we were really paying attention and we really, had some attachment to this. So
I remember what I was going to ask you, and I'm curious. Um, we got screeners for this, so I'm assuming it was the same for you. But do you watch the screeners with the subtitles on?
I do. Yep.
So during the scenes with Catherine and Nicola and Jonathan in the past, what I saw was a whole bunch of subtitles of dialogue that I did not hear.
Same.
Do you have that
Yeah.
same experience?
Same experience where you're sort of there's this obviously there's music on top of it. There's I think some grieving or some real traumatic sounds, and then there's lines that apparently Jonathan is saying mostly about telling her what she should do, but that's sort of covered up. Not quite sure I may understand what the reasoning is for that, but that was my experience as well.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I kind of get the artistic decision
Yeah,
to not have that dialogue be something that we're hearing.
yeah,
But I thought it was kind of interesting that then it was there in the subtitles. And, I'm not sure that most people have the subtitles on.
yeah.
I think it's become more common, which
I think so. Yeah,
good job, people. I used to be a weirdo 25 years ago. And so, but probably a lot of people didn't. So yeah, that was something that was occurring to me to
yeah.
mention. And I'm curious about the experience of if people watched it and didn't have the subtitles on and got that silence, maybe it would land a little bit differently. You've got two possible experiences here where, because
That's
like I
true.
was reading what he was saying, but you couldn't
I
hear
was
it.
too. Yeah, because I couldn't hear it certainly, so I was reading as well.
So kind of an interesting move. I wonder if they, almost did that in post production, decided, well, let's actually not let you hear this dialogue. They were actually saying the lines, and then when they were putting it together, said, you know what, let's make this like
Yeah,
more um silent, or it does feed into the feel of the scene in a way that I thought
yeah,
made sense. But yeah,
yeah.
um, interesting that the subtitles are there though. It's just, um, but cool. Yeah. Anything else you want to hit on before we wrap up here?
I think that's it. Yeah, I think we've covered the bases there. Except glad we did this. I think interesting story, maybe not quite the can't get ahead of it mystery that some people were pitching it to be, but really, I mean, this was an entertaining show.
Yeah, agreed. Um, yeah, I don't know if that I felt like it was much of a mystery,
Yeah.
but it's like I suppose there were questions and then
Yeah.
answers. So fine, fair enough. All right, cool. So from here, we're gonna start digging into Silo season two. So hopefully people are interested in following along with us, watching Silo. It's a season two of Silo. So of course, if you haven't watched Silo at all, you have some catching up to do. We watched season one, and the next week, season two premieres on November 15th. Um, I wrote on season one on the site. If you want to go look at the recaps I wrote episode by episode, the current plan is Ryan's going to write on season two, and then we're also going to be talking about it on the podcast. So a lot of
Yes.
things for you to listen to and things for you to read, and that's about as far as we can go. I mean, we're kind of going whole hog on the silo
Yeah.
coverage.
And there
Um,
are there are short stories that this is based on if you want to consume that as well. I may try to digest one of those this week before we get back into season two.
right on, yeah. So looking forward to that. We'll be back next week. Talk about Silo season two premiere. I haven't checked yet if it's just one episode. I think it's just one episode.
I think I checked on this. It's one episode per week for 8 or 10 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, cool, good. All right, so thanks as always for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do leave us a good rating, review, and so on and so forth. If you're checking out this part on the YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, give the thumbs up to the video. Really appreciate it. Check out tvobsessive.com. You can follow us on social media. You search for TV Obsessive, you should find us. And we'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week for Silo.